The sky above Kepler 7d had never been so full of ships. They came slowly, the way a storm comes. First one dark shape near the horizon, then two, then 10, then too many to count. They were long and gray, built like the bones of dead animals, and they moved without sound through the thin air of the desert moon. The sun was still up, but it did not matter. The light was eaten by the shadows of the fleet, until the ground below turned cold. Sergeant Mara Voss stood on the roof of the communications building and watched them come. She did not run. She did not shake. She just looked up, counted what she could, and let out a slow breath through her nose. Behind her, the colony was empty. The miners, the engineers, the families, all of them were gone, pulled out in the last evacuation ships 40 hours ago. The place looked like a town that had forgotten it existed. Doors left open, tools dropped in the dust. A child's shoe sitting in the middle of the main road for no reason anyone could explain. Mara had stayed behind. So had 4 others. She climbed back down the ladder and walked into the main hall of the relay station. The building was squat and ugly, made of thick metal walls and not much else. But inside it, there was a communications relay, a machine the size of a large table, full of wires and blinking lights, that was broadcasting the position and movement of every human military ship in this sector of space. As long as it kept running, the fleet could find its way. As long as the fleet could find its way, there was a chance of fighting back. The Vreth wanted it destroyed, or taken. Either way, they wanted it quiet. Mara was going to make sure that did not happen. She found the others already gathered around the relay table. Corporal Jin Rai was crouched on the floor with a panel open, fingers moving fast through the relay's wiring, checking every connection. He was 23 years old, small and quick, with dark circles under his eyes that never really went away. He was the best drone operator in the regiment, and he knew it, though he never said so out loud. Private First Class Deo Okafor sat on a crate with a medical bag open across his knees, sorting supplies by type and counting each one twice. He was tall and lean, with careful hands, and he had a way of being calm that did not feel like coldness. It felt like something deeper, like he had already made peace with whatever was coming, and was now just waiting to be useful. He was the group's medic, and the only one who had read alien biology manuals in his spare time. Warrant Officer Layla Nazrin was at the far end of the room, drawing on a piece of paper. Not pictures, diagrams, pressure lines, detonation points, pipe measurements. She had already spent a full day walking the colony's ore processing plant and the fuel storage behind it, and she had come back with 12 pages of notes and a look on her face like someone who had just been handed a gift. She was an explosives engineer. To her, a mining colony was not a problem. It was a toolkit. And then there was Gunnery Sergeant Hector Salinas, sitting in a chair with his boots up on the table, cleaning his rifle in the slow and careful way he did everything. He was 51 years old, the oldest of the 5 by a long distance, with gray at his temples and scars on his hands that he never talked about. He had been a sniper for 27 years. He had served on 4 planets, 2 moons, and 1 station that was no longer there. He did not get nervous before a fight. He got quiet. He looked up when Mara walked in. "How many?" he asked. "Enough to cover the sky," she said. He nodded like this was information he could work with. "Ground force estimate?" he asked. "Nothing confirmed yet. But the fleet size—" She pulled out a small screen and put it on the table. The numbers from Jin's sensor drones were already coming in. 70, maybe 80,000. Ground troops. The room was quiet for a moment. 80,000, Dale said. Not as a question. Just placing it in the air so everyone could look at it. Give or take, Mara said. Layla did not look up from her diagrams. Good, she said. More targets. The Vreth were called the Vreth because that was the closest human mouths could get to the sound they made when they communicated. They were tall, most of them close to 7 feet, with scaled skin in colors between brown and dark green, 4 arms that ended in 3-fingered hands, and eyes that were wide and yellow and did not blink in the way human eyes did. They moved in groups. They always moved in groups. Their military commanders led through a kind of signal sharing that was not quite telepathy, but was close enough that individual soldiers rarely needed to think for themselves. A Vreth army in the field was less like a collection of individuals and more like one large creature, with 80,000 bodies. They had conquered 17 species before they found humanity. Of those 17, 12 had surrendered immediately. 4 had fought and been broken within days. 1 had simply vanished. The Vreth never explained what happened to them, and no one had asked twice. The Vreth did not believe in long battles. They believed in weight, in numbers, in the simple mathematics of force applied until resistance stopped. What they were not prepared for, what no one who had fought them had ever managed to show them, was that some things did not stop when the math said they should. The broadcast came in at sundown. It came through every open frequency at once, in 17 languages, including 3 human ones. The voice was deep and even, the kind of voice that was used to being obeyed. It said, "Humans of the relay station on Kepler 7D, you are surrounded by the forces of the Vreth Dominion. Your fleet has retreated. You are alone. You have 1 hour to power down the relay. Come out of your structure with your hands open, and kneel. If you do this, your lives will be preserved. If you do not, you will be removed. The choice is simple. The hour begins now." The 5 of them listened to it together. When it was done, Jin looked at Mara. "Are we going to respond?" Mara walked to the communications panel. She opened a channel on the same frequency, wide broadcast, going out to every ship in the Vreth fleet above them, and every sensor in range. She pressed the transmit key. "Come and get it," she said. "We'll be here." She released the key. The channel closed. Hector put his rifle back together with a quiet series of clicks. Layla folded her diagrams. Dio zipped his medical bag. Jin went back to the wiring. Outside, the Vreth fleet began to move into position. 80,000 soldiers, prepared to land on a desert moon, to deal with 5 humans who had just told an empire to come find them. The relay blinked steadily in the dark of the room. They had 36 hours before the first Vreth boots hit the ground. Mara intended to use every minute. She spread a hand-drawn map of the colony across the relay table. It was not a beautiful map. It was full of crossed-out lines and scribbled numbers and arrows that changed direction halfway through. But it was honest. It showed the colony for what it was: a collection of industrial buildings, access tunnels, ore storage units, ridgelines of dark rock, and one long central road that ran from the landing pads at the north end to the processing plant at the south. "We can't hold the perimeter," Mara said. "There's no point trying. Too much ground, too few of us. So we don't defend the edges. We defend the middle. The relay stays on. Everything else is a trap." Layla was already nodding before Mara finished speaking. She had been thinking the same thing since the moment she saw the colony map the day before. She picked up a pen and circled the ore processing plant at the south end. "This," she said, "is not a building. This is a weapon. The pressure systems in the ore crushers run at 1200 psi. The fuel reserve behind the main structure holds about 40,000 liters of mining-grade combustible. If I route the pressure lines through the right junctions and put the fuel on a timed bleed," she drew a quick diagram on the edge of the map, her hand moving fast, "I can turn the entire south end of the colony into a directed explosive charge. Not a simple explosion, a shaped one. Anything inside a 300-meter cone to the south gets hit with pressure, heat, and fragmentation simultaneously." The others looked at the diagram. "That's the size of a city block," Deo said. "Yes," Layla said. "How long to set it up?" Mara asked. 20 hours. Maybe 18, if Jin helps me with the wiring." Jin raised his hand without looking up from his laptop. "I can do the wiring, but I need the first 4 hours for the drones." He turned the laptop around. The screen showed a map of the colony from above, covered in small blue dots. "I have 41 mining drones in the equipment bay. They're not weapons. They're built for soil sampling and tunnel mapping. But their sensors can detect movement, heat, and electromagnetic output within about 200 meters. If I link them into a single network and spread them across the outer edges of the colony. He tapped a key, and the blue dots spread across the map like seeds. We'll know where every Vreth soldier is before they get close enough to see us. And the drones can jam short-range communications. Not perfectly, but enough to break their unit coordination for 30 to 60 seconds at a time. For a hive-linked army, that's a long time to be confused. Mara studied the screen. What else can the drones do? Annoy people, Jin said. Fly at faces, make noise, create heat signatures in empty areas so their targeting reads them as bodies. They can't kill anything, but they can make an army think it's being attacked from 6 directions at once. Hector spoke from his chair. He had been listening with his eyes half closed, the way he always did when he was thinking hard. I walked the ridgeline this morning, north-facing rock, 3 levels of natural elevation. I can set 14 firing positions up there, connected by a crawl system I dig myself. From the top position, I have clean line of sight to every approach from the north and east. He paused. From down below, anyone watching will see fire coming from different points. They'll think there are more of us. There always are, Mara said. It was not a joke. Deo had his medical notes open. I've been reading the Vreth field manuals we captured on Harrow Station last year. Their pain response is strong, but their fear response is suppressed by hive conditioning. They don't rout easily because individual soldiers don't feel individual fear. They feel the group's assessment of the situation. But there's something else. He found the page he was looking for. Confusion. When the hive signal breaks down, when they lose coordination and can't read what the rest of the unit is doing, they freeze. Not for long, but they freeze. If Jin's jammers can hit them right at the moment of contact. Freeze first, then blow the plant, Layla said. That's the idea. Mara looked around the table. These were not generals. They were not strategists from a military academy. They were a sergeant, a corporal, a private, a warrant officer, and a gunnery sergeant who had been left behind with 6 days of rations and orders to hold 1 building. But looking at them now, at the map, the diagrams, the drone network spreading across Jin's screen, she felt something that was not quite hope and not quite confidence, but was somewhere in between. They got to work. For 2 days, the colony was the noisiest it had been since the miners left. Layla and Jin worked through the first night on the processing plant, crawling through pipes and access hatches, rerouting pressure lines, and laying down detonator wire with the careful speed of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Jin wired his drone network between shifts, pausing only to eat and once to sleep for 3 hours on a toolbox. Deo helped where he could, and spent his quiet hours in the deep storage tunnel he had chosen as his medical bay, setting it up with the same quiet attention to detail he gave to everything. Hector disappeared into the ridgeline before dawn on the 2nd day, and did not come back until the next evening, his hands raw and his knees dark with dust, carrying nothing but a water bottle and a satisfied look. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Vreth Scout Battalion came. 3,000 soldiers. They moved in tight formation, their armored suits catching the early light, their movements so synchronized it looked mechanical. They came from the north, down the main road, in a column that stretched back past the landing site. At the front of the column, a Vreth officer broadcast a final surrender demand. No one answered. The column entered the colony perimeter. Jin hit the first jammer. The Vreth communications went choppy, not dead, but broken. The tight formation began to lose its shape as individual soldiers stopped receiving clean signals from their neighbors. Then the drone swarm rose from the rooftops. 41 mining drones, moving fast and low, diving at helmets and sensors, filling every communication frequency with static, projecting false heat signatures in empty alleyways. The Vreth scouts broke formation, trying to target things that were not there. Their weapons fired at shadows. Their units, unable to read each other cleanly, split into smaller groups, trying to make sense of an attack that seemed to come from everywhere. 3 seconds later, Hector's rifle spoke from the ridgeline. He did not hurry. He was never hurried. He moved from position to position through his crawlway system, firing from a different point each time, always from elevation, always at the edge of the formation where the disruption was worst. From below, it looked like a sniper team of 8 or 10. It was one man. The Vreth Scout Battalion lost 400 soldiers in the first 20 minutes of contact. They lost another 600 trying to advance through the colony's outer streets, where Layla had placed pressure-triggered charges in every third doorway. They lost another 100 to drone collisions that shattered visors and knocked soldiers off their feet in the middle of crossfire. After 40 minutes, the battalion pulled back. They had taken 40% casualties. They had not reached the relay building. Jin watched the withdrawal on his sensor screen and quietly updated his damage report. Deo had treated a cut on Mara's forearm from a piece of flying debris and was making notes on the Vreth wounded he could observe through binoculars. Above them, in the command ship that hung at the edge of the atmosphere, High Warlord Skarath received the battle report from his scouts. He read it twice. Then he requested the full sensor data from the engagement, including heat signatures, movement patterns, and communication intercept logs. He read that twice as well. "How many defenders did the colony report?" he asked his aide. "5, Warlord," the aide said. Skarath looked at the data again. The sensor log showed movement from 14 different positions, explosions from 3 independent systems, drone coordination across the entire colony grid, medical supplies being deployed in real time. 5, he said again. He was not angry, not exactly. What he felt was something his empire had very little experience with. Day 3 began with fire from above. Skarath had made a decision in the night. Patience was not a strategy. The relay was still broadcasting. Every hour it stayed on. The human fleet had better coordinates, better options, a clearer picture of where the Vreth Armada was sitting. He had not come to this moon to be studied. He had come to conquer it. He sent 15,000 soldiers. He sent armored crawlers, heavy machines on 6 legs, built to break walls and hold ground under fire. He sent 2 gunships to clear the ridgeline before the ground force advanced. He sent them all at once because he had come to understand, reading the scout data again in the early hours, that the 5 humans in that colony were the kind of problem that grew worse the longer you waited. Layla heard the gunships first. She was already in the processing plant, checking her detonation sequence for the 4th time, when the low hum of their engines pushed through the walls. She looked at her wiring. She looked at the countdown on her small timer screen. Then she picked up her radio. "Gunships coming for the ridgeline," she said. "Hector, get low." "Already low," Hector said. His voice was flat and even, the same voice he used when he was telling someone the weather. The first gunship made 1 pass over the ridgeline and fired. The rock face exploded in 3 places. Dust and stone went into the air in thick clouds. Hector was in his crawlway, 6 inches below the surface, listening to the world come apart above him and counting seconds. The second gunship came around for a second pass. Jin was watching its navigation signature on his laptop. He had spent the night before studying the frequency range of Vreth military navigation systems from the captured field manuals Dio had found. He had written a program, roughly, with errors he fixed as he went, that could spoof a navigation signal at close range. It was not clean code. It was not the kind of code he would have shown anyone in normal circumstances. But it worked. He sent the spoof signal when the gunship was 200 meters out. The navigation system on the gunship read a sudden terrain obstruction directly ahead that was not there. The pilot, or the autopilot, the Vreth used both, pulled up hard to avoid it. The gunship's underside met the top of the processing plant's tallest exhaust tower at full climbing speed. The crash was loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling of the relay building 400 meters away. The second gunship broke off its approach and began climbing. Jin sent another spoof. The second gunship's navigation went sideways, turned it hard left, and put it directly into the flight path of a landing transport that was coming in below it. The collision was smaller, but the result was the same. Both ships came down outside the colony perimeter in clouds of black smoke. 2 gunships, Jin said into the radio. His hands were shaking slightly. He did not mention this. But there was no time to settle. The ground force was already coming through the north end of the colony, 15,000 soldiers and 12 crawlers, moving fast now, filling the streets. They had learned from the scout battalion. They came in dispersed groups this time, not a tight column. They moved building to building. They were harder to pin down. Hector was back in his nest on the ridgeline, dust still falling off his shoulders, rifle up. He picked his targets the way he always did. Not the easiest ones, the most important ones. Officers, communication units, crawler pilots visible through narrow viewport windows. He moved between positions after every third shot. The Vreth below looked for him in 17 different locations. He was in none of them. Layla waited. She had one shot with the processing plant. One. She needed the crawlers inside the blast cone, and she needed the main troop concentration between the plant and the storage tanks. She watched on Jin's sensor screen as the red dots moved through the colony streets. She watched the crawlers push through the south gate, grinding over the rubble of the entrance she had weakened 4 days ago for exactly this purpose. When 8 of the 12 crawlers were inside the cone, and 3 of the main troop groups were between them and the fuel reserve, she pressed the button. The south end of Kepler 7D colony ceased to exist. The explosion was not loud in the way most explosions are loud. It was more like a wall of sound, a single enormous pressure that hit the chest before the ears could process it. The shaped charge Layla had built did exactly what she designed it to do. The force moved in a directed cone, outward and slightly upward, turning the crawlers and the soldiers between them into debris in a fraction of a second. The fuel reserve added a secondary blast that collapsed 3 buildings inward and sent a column of orange fire 200 meters into the sky. On the Vreth command ship, the sensors went white for 6 seconds. The blast also sent a piece of flying pipe through the wall of the room where Layla was standing. It caught her across the left side of her face and her hands, which were raised in front of her at the moment of impact. She went down hard. The burns from the heat that followed were fast and merciless. She was conscious, but she could not use her hands, and she could not see from her left eye. Deo was there in 4 minutes. He had been watching the sensor screen, and he had moved the moment he saw her stop transmitting. He came through the service tunnel at a run, dropped to his knees beside her, and started working without speaking. He had done this before, not in a war, in emergencies, in the years before he enlisted, in a city where emergencies came without warning and without permission. His hands did not shake. He talked to her quietly while he worked, not about what was wrong with her, but about small things, ordinary things, the kind of talking that keeps a person in the present moment when pain is trying to pull them somewhere else. "Tell me about Lagos," he said, pressing a clean dressing over her eye. Her voice was rough, and her words were not always in the right order. But she talked. She would keep the eye. The hands would heal. In 2 hours, Layla Nasrin was sitting upright against the wall, with bandaged hands and a patch on her face, working on a backup detonation plan, using her elbows to hold the paper still. That night, the 5 of them sat together in the deepest room of the relay station, eating cold rations from foil pouches. The fighting had stopped when the Vreth pulled back to regroup after the plant explosion. The colony was quiet, in the way that only places that have just been through violence are quiet. Not peaceful, just empty of sound. Nobody talked about the battle at first. They ate. Hector found a piece of actual chocolate in the bottom of his ration pack and split it 5 ways without being asked. Deo told a story about his mother's cooking, a specific dish, the way she made it on Sundays, the exact smell of it, and he described it so well that Jin groaned and said he could almost taste it. Hector took a worn photograph from his front pocket and laid it on the ground in front of him. 2 kids and a dog in front of a house with a red door. Nobody asked who they were. They all understood what the photograph was for. Up above them, in the cold dark of the command ship, a Vreth cultural analyst delivered a report to Scarif. The warlord had requested it the night before. He had asked for everything in Vreth archives related to human history, human wars, and human behavior under extreme conditions. The analyst read the highlights. Humans had been nearly destroyed by a disease that killed 1/3 of their ancient population, and rebuilt. They had fought wars so large they involved most of their planets simultaneously, more than once, and each time emerged and tried again. They had split their own species across ideologies, borders, and resources, in conflicts that lasted generations, and kept going. Every empire that had ever risen among them had eventually fallen. They had faced famine, flood, ice ages, and their own weapons, and after each one, there were always some of them still there. An advisor standing near the back said it first, in a low voice. "Warlord, they have been doing this to each other for 10,000 years. We may have made an error in our assessment." Scarath said nothing for a long time. In the colony below, Hector put his photograph back in his pocket. Mara finished her ration and looked at the 4 people around her, tired, hurt, unbroken, and felt something she had no good word for. The relay blinked in the next room, still broadcasting. Day 5. The relay was still on. The Vreth had lost more than 22,000 soldiers, 2 gunships, 8 armored crawlers, 1 transport. The colony's south end was a field of black debris and cooling metal. The ridgeline to the north was pocked with craters that had done nothing to stop the sniper inside them. 3 full assault waves had entered the colony. None of them had reached the relay building. 0 humans were dead. 3 were wounded. 1 had burns on her hands and face. 1 had broken ribs from a tunnel collapse he had caused himself. 1 had a deep cut across her forearm that had been cleaned, closed, and ignored. On the command ship, Scarath stood alone in his strategy room and looked at the numbers for a long time. He was not a commander who lied to himself. It was one of the qualities that had made him dangerous over his long career. He could look at facts, even when they were uncomfortable. The facts were 5 humans, 5 days, more than 20,000 of his soldiers dead or disabled, and the relay was still broadcasting. He had more soldiers. He could send another 30,000. He could send them all. He could drop enough firepower on that colony to turn the entire moon into flat glass. But the relay building was hardened and deep, and a planetary bombardment would take 3 days to prepare properly. And in 3 days, his sensor team told him the human fleet would be within range. He had a window, a narrow one. But he was not going to use it by sending more men into a colony that 5 people had turned into a machine for killing them. He made a decision that his officers would later describe, in private, as the strangest order they had received in their careers. He requested a parley. 1-on-1. In the open. No weapons declared. Between himself and the human commander. He broadcast the request on the same frequency Mara had used to answer him on the first day. In the relay building, the 5 of them heard it together. Jin looked at Mara. "That's a trap." "Maybe," Mara said. "If he kills you." "Then you 4 keep going," she said. It was not dramatic, it was just the truth. Deo looked at her for a moment, then looked away. He understood. They all did. Layla, sitting against the wall with her bandaged hands, said, "Find out what he wants. We still have 40 minutes before the fleet arrives. Information is useful." Hector said nothing. He just took his rifle off his back and handed it to Jin, who was the second best shot among them. It was a small gesture. It meant, if she doesn't come back, you'll need this. Mara walked out of the relay building and into the open desert. She did not wear a dress uniform. She did not carry a white flag. She walked out in the same dented, scorched field kit she had been wearing for 5 days, with a sidearm on her hip that she did not intend to draw, and a water bottle half empty on her belt. The sun was bright, and the air tasted of dust and burned metal. The Vreth honor guard was waiting 300 meters from the perimeter edge. 100 soldiers, standing in 2 lines, perfectly still. Between them, at the end of a narrow open corridor, stood Scarath. He was larger than any Vreth she had seen before. 8 feet of armored scale, 4 arms folded at rest, yellow eyes fixed on her from the moment she came into view. He wore no helmet. His head was wide and flat at the crown, with a ridge of hard cartilage along the top that his soldiers lacked. He had been doing this for a very long time. It showed. Mara walked to the edge of the corridor between his honor guard and stopped. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Scarath said in clear and careful human language that had clearly been studied and practiced, I have fought 17 species. I have never asked to speak with an enemy commander before the battle was finished. Then this is new for both of us, Mara said. I want to understand something, he said, not as a military question, as a question I cannot find the answer to in any data I have. He paused. Why do you not kneel? Mara did not answer immediately. She thought about it. She gave it the weight it deserved. Your situation, Scarath continued, is without logic. You are 5, we are 80,000. Your fleet has retreated. Your colony is destroyed. You have no reinforcement, no resupply, no reasonable chance of survival. Every calculation, every one, says you should have surrendered on the first day. You did not. I want to know why. Mara was quiet for another moment. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, and it was not angry. It was the voice of someone explaining something they had known so long, they almost forgot other people didn't know it. Kneeling means it's over, she said, and humans don't believe it's ever over. Scarath tilted his head slightly. Not when there's one person still standing, she continued. Not when there's 1 second still left. Not when there's one option not yet tried. To kneel, to really kneel the way you mean it, is to accept that the end has come, and humans, more than anything else we are or ever have been, refuse to accept the end. We've been refusing it for 10,000 years. Every time something tried to finish us, disease, famine, war, our own worst choices, there were always some of us who just didn't accept it, who kept going, not because the math said they could win, because they hadn't decided to stop yet. She looked up at him steadily. You've beaten 17 species, but I'd be willing to bet that none of them had been fighting each other, themselves, their own worst problems, for 10,000 years before you got there. We've had practice. We know what the end looks like, and we know that it almost never looks the way it's supposed to. She paused. Also, she said, the relay is still on, and our fleet is closer than you think. Scarath was still for a long time. His honor guard did not move. The desert wind pushed dust across the open ground between them. Then he said something his translators would struggle with later, not because the words were complicated, but because the tone was. It was not the tone of a conqueror. It was not the tone of a man giving an order or making a threat. It was quieter than either of those things. You are a strange and terrible people, he said. He turned and walked back between his honor guard, which closed behind him like water filling a gap. He did not attack her. Mara stood in the open desert for another few seconds, watching the honor guard withdraw. Then she turned and walked back to the relay building, at the same pace she had left it. When she came through the door, the 4 others were looking at her. He's not attacking, she said. Jin was already at his sensor screen. His face was lit by the blue glow of incoming data. Mara, he said quietly. He turned the screen toward her. At the edge of the sensor range, 40 minutes out, maybe 38 now, the human fleet was coming in fast. The relay had been doing its job. Scarath gave the order 30 minutes after the parley ended. Not a retreat. Not yet. One final assault. Everything left. All of it, at once, because the fleet was coming and the window was closing, and if the relay was not silenced in the next 30 minutes, it would never be silenced at all. He knew this. His commanders knew this. Even the soldiers moving into position at the colony's edges knew this, in the way that hive-linked soldiers know things, not as individual thoughts, but as a shared pressure, a collective understanding that this was the last chance. 50,000 soldiers, every crawler still operational, every remaining piece of air support, all of it, converging on one building in the middle of a ruined desert colony. In the relay building, Jin watched it on his sensor screen and said very calmly, "They're all coming." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Mara said, "Then we use everything we have left." What they had left was not much. Most of Layla's charges were gone with the processing plant. The drone swarm was down to 11 units, the rest lost to weapons fire or crashes over the past days. Hector had ammunition for roughly 40 minutes of sustained fire. Dio had medical supplies for moderate injuries, not for serious ones, not anymore. Jin had his jammers and his laptop, and the last 3 spoofing programs he had written. What they also had was 5 days of knowing this colony better than anyone alive. Every tunnel, every roof access, every corner and shadow and piece of cover. They had fought over this ground so many times that it had stopped being a location and had become something closer to an extension of themselves. Layla moved first. Her hands were still bandaged, but she could hold things well enough, and she had spent the previous night building something small and ugly from the remaining pressure fittings and fuel cells in the supply room. She called it a plasma lance, which was generous. It was a short metal pipe, connected to a pressurized canister with a sparker at the end. It had a range of about 15 meters, and it would burn through most things in that range very quickly. It could only be fired a dozen times before the canister emptied. She carried it one-handed and moved to the east wall of the relay building, which was where the first wave would hit. Hector was already gone. He had moved to the ridgeline the moment the sensors showed the Vreth mobilizing. He climbed with broken ribs and did not make a sound about it. At the top of his highest nest, he could see the entire approach from the north, a dark sea of Vreth soldiers filling the colony streets, moving fast now, the coordination of their hive signal burning bright and clean because there were no jammers left out that far. He settled in, he breathed, he began. Jin ran the jammers at full power the moment the first units reached the outer perimeter. The signal was wider and stronger than anything he had tried before, covering every Vreth communication frequency at once. It would burn through his equipment in 20 minutes. He knew that. He ran it anyway, and while it ran he worked his remaining drones, 11 small machines that should have been mapping ore deposits, like a conductor leading an orchestra of very small and very irritating instruments. He sent them into the faces of the crawler pilots. He crashed 2 into the targeting sensors of the lead armored units. He used the last 4 to fly suicide runs at the communication arrays on the backs of the Vreth officer units, which were the nodes the hive signal flowed through. Without the officer nodes, the hive signal broke into fragments. 50,000 soldiers who had been one creature became 50,000 creatures who were suddenly much less sure of what to do. They kept coming, but they came slower. They came in pieces. They came without the terrible precision that had made the Vreth unstoppable for so many years. The fight for the relay building lasted 22 minutes. Later, when people tried to describe what happened during those 22 minutes, they found that the numbers alone didn't carry it. The numbers said that 3 of the 5 defenders were injured further. Hector's broken ribs got worse when he fell 6 feet from a crawlway that took a direct hit. Mara took fragmentation across her left leg from a close-range blast, and Jin lost hearing in one ear when a Vreth soldier made it inside and detonated a device 2 rooms away before Dio stopped him with a surgical hammer that was the heaviest thing in his medical kit. The numbers also said that the Vreth advance stalled twice at the outer walls, that Layla fired her plasma lance 11 times, and the 12th pull on the trigger produced nothing, and she threw the empty pipe at the 13th soldier anyway. That Hector, with 2 cracked ribs and 1 good sightline remaining, put rounds down range until his ammunition ran out, and then picked up a Vreth weapon from a body on the ridgeline below him and kept going with that. The numbers said that the relay never went offline. Not for 1 second. The human fleet dropped into orbit 38 minutes after Jin first spotted them on the sensor screen. 40 warships, heavy class, coming in hot on a direct intercept course with the Vreth Armada. They had the coordinates from the relay signal, clean, precise, exactly where each Vreth vessel was and how fast it was moving. The first broadside hit before the Vreth fleet had fully repositioned from its planetary blockade formation. On the ground, Skarath received 3 reports simultaneously. The fleet was engaged, the orbital support grid was failing, and the ground force, what was left of it, was being cut off from resupply and extraction as the space battle pushed the Vreth transports out of range. He stood in the ruins of what had been the colony's main road and looked at the relay building ahead. Still standing, still lit from inside, still broadcasting. He gave the order to retreat. It went out across every breath frequency on the moon. 50,000 soldiers stopped. Then they turned. Then they began moving back toward the landing pads in the north, where the remaining transports were already powering up to pull out before the fleet finished the armada above. It was the first time a Vreth ground army had turned around and walked away. Not been forced back, not been destroyed, simply decided to leave. The human fleet set down 30 minutes later, boots on the ground within the hour. The soldiers who came out of those ships were fresh and rested and ready, and they walked through the colony gates and into a place that looked like it had been through the end of the world. Craters, burned-out buildings. The south end was still smoking. The ridgeline was cratered and dark. The main road was covered in debris from 5 days of fighting across every inch of it. And in the middle of it all, standing in front of the relay building, were 5 humans. Deo had his arm in a makeshift sling. Layla had both hands bandaged and one eye patched. Hector was standing slightly sideways to take pressure off his ribs, which would later prove to be cracked in 3 places. Jin had blood on his temple from the ear injury and was holding a sensor screen that was still showing him data, because he had not stopped watching it yet. Mara had a torn piece of cloth wrapped around her left leg and was standing straight anyway. Admiral Yena Torres walked through the gate at the head of her command team. She was a tall woman with gray at her temples and a career's worth of experience written into her face. She had read the relay data during the approach. She had seen the sensor logs. She had looked at the numbers and done the math twice because the first time she had thought she had made an error. She stopped in front of the 5 of them and looked around slowly at what 5 days of 5 people had done to 8,000 soldiers of a Vreth assault force. Then she looked back at Mara. How, she said, quietly, not as a military question, just as a human being confronted with something she could not fully hold in her head. Mara looked at Dio and Layla and Jin and Hector. She looked at what they looked like. She thought about the question. She shrugged. We're human, she said. 3 months later, in a ceremony on Earth that was broadcast to every human colony and station in the explored sector, the 5 of them stood in dress uniforms and received the Solar Cross, the highest military honor humanity gave. The hall was full and very quiet when the medals were placed. Afterward, at the reception, a journalist found Dio standing near the window with a glass of water and asked him the question everyone was asking. What was it like? Were you afraid? Dio looked at the glass in his hand for a moment. I was scared every single second, he said. The whole time. Every moment of every day. The journalist looked surprised. Then how did you keep going? Dio glanced across the room to where Hector was standing, talking to someone's grandmother, laughing about something. He thought about a photograph of 2 kids and a dog in front of a red door. He thought about the smell of his mother's cooking on a Sunday. He thought about a relay blinking in the dark. You do it scared, he said. That's all it is. You don't wait until you're not afraid. You just go anyway. That's what courage is. It's not the absence of fear. It's deciding the fear doesn't get to make the decision. Somewhere out in the galaxy, in the war rooms and archive halls of 24 civilizations, a new file was being quietly opened and passed around. It was short. It had no pictures. It was just numbers and dates and a summary of what 5 humans had done on a desert moon for 5 days against 80,000 soldiers of the most successful conquering force in the known universe. The subject heading, translated into every language that had a word for warning, read simply, Do not corner humans.